I know that Israel does not stand alone. I know that America stands with Israel. I know that you stand with Israel.
Addressing Congress, Israel's prime minister warns a joint session that Iran cannot be trusted. Morally sound alternative. Christians circumvent Obamacare by sharing medical costs. New Shepherd. Nearly 1 million Catholics in the Diocese of San Diego will have a new bishop next month. And what God won't forgive. Pope Francis warns against being fake saints. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 3rd, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Israel's prime minister warns America that a proposed nuclear deal between Iran and the U.S. must be avoided at all costs. Benjamin Netanyahu addressed a joint session of Congress today. More than 4 dozen Democratic lawmakers joined the Obama administration in criticizing his approach. Wyatt Goolsby covers the story from just outside the White House tonight. Wyatt?
Brian, the president says that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech is, quote, nothing new and doesn't offer any viable alternatives to nuclear talks with Iran. Now, the White House and the prime minister has had their differences in the past, but some are saying that today is pretty strong language, especially in contrast to the warm reception we saw the prime minister get in Congress today. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made his case to Congress that a nuclear deal with Iran is a bad idea.
That deal will not prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. It would all but guarantee.
Netanyahu says any concessions to Iran might lead to a nuclear arsenal, putting the very existence of the Jewish state and the world at risk.
The greatest danger facing our world is the marriage of militant Islam with nuclear weapons. To defeat ISIS and let Iran get nuclear weapons would be to win the battle but lose the war.
House Speaker John Boehner invited the prime minister to speak to Congress, a move that angered the White House. The Obama administration says Iran will never be permitted to build a nuclear weapon. White House officials are worried Netanyahu is spilling sensitive details about the proposed nuclear deal between Iran and 6 other world powers. That deal could be finalized by the end of this month.
Judaism, yes! Zionism, no!
Several groups are protesting Netanyahu's visit. These American Orthodox Jews do not support the state of Israel, and they do not agree with Netanyahu's claim to speak for all Jews.
He does not represent us. And if someone was saying in your name that something you don't like to be said in your name, so you would say, no, it's not right.
The speech comes just 2 weeks ahead of a tight national election in which Netanyahu is fighting to hold on to his job. The president says he did not meet with the prime minister to avoid any perception that he is meddling in Israel's election. Meanwhile, nuclear talks between the U.S. and Iran continue today in Switzerland. American officials say they are making progress. And despite some Democrats boycotting Netanyahu's speech today, we can tell you, Brian, from being there that it was an absolute packed chamber and galleries anyway. Brian.
All right, Wyatt Goolsby at the White House, thank you. And Dale Hansen Burke is the author of The Skeptic's Guide to the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. She's also a contributing editor at Religion News Service. Did President Obama, his statement that Netanyahu didn't offer an alternative to these negotiations, do you agree with that or disagree?
Well, there certainly was no concrete alternative. I mean, there was a general view that we're moving in a way that he does not feel comfortable with. It's hard to know exactly what that means because we don't have an agreement at this point. But certainly in Israel, there's a concern about Iran, an overwhelming concern about Iran. And when you think about it, when the U.S. is talking about ISIS, which we're talking about most of the time these days, and we're in a coalition with Iran, that's got to be very disconcerting to Israel.
I'm sure that it is. Do you think that Netanyahu is overstating Iran's domination in that region?
Well, I think part of what he was trying to do was remind Americans in general that Israelis and Jews in general are really in a precarious spot in the world. There's been a rise in anti-Semitism. There's really an ongoing campaign to wipe out Israel by Iran and others. So I think he wanted to remind everybody and set the stage and remind them of the Holocaust. He had a Holocaust survivor there reminding us that the Holocaust happened in our lifetime.
Given the longstanding U.S. relationship with Israel, do you find that the language from the White House is unusual?
Well, I mean, I think part of what they're trying to do is stay out of the Israeli elections. I think there's, if you look at the polls, I mean, there's a good chance that Netanyahu will not be the next prime minister. So in a couple of weeks, the president could be dealing with somebody completely different.
I think he wishes he will be dealing with somebody.
Could be.
Perhaps. There are people who say that. All right, we appreciate the report from Dale Hansen Burke. We appreciate you being with us tonight.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Congress is sending the president a bill to fund the Department of Homeland Security through the end of the budget year without overturning his immigration policies. The House clears legislation today to fund Homeland Security through September. A standoff last week threatened a partial shutdown that would furlough thousands of workers. Today's vote, 257 to 167 in favor. Syrian activists say Islamic State terrorists have released 4 more Christian hostages. A married couple, a woman, and a 6-year-old girl were freed today. Earlier this week, 19 hostages were released. At least 190 Assyrian Christians remain captives of ISIS, which overran several Christian villages in eastern Syria last week. Iraqi security forces continue efforts to recapture Tikrit from Islamic State terrorists. The advance of Iraqi troops was slowed today by roadside bombs and ISIS suicide attacks. Soldiers were supported by Iranian-backed Shiite militias and advisors, as well as some Sunni tribal fighters. Retaking the city of Tikrit would help open a supply line for Iraqi forces to take back Mosul, which was captured by ISIS last year. Cardinal Timothy Dolan speaks out against Islamic State violence.
I think it's a systematic, well choreographed, very well focused attempt to eradicate the ancient Christian population of the Mideast.
Cardinal Dolan says he believes with all his heart ISIS does not represent genuine Islamic thought. Cardinal Francis George is admitted to a hospital for evaluation today. The retired Archbishop of Chicago stopped treatment for kidney cancer more than a month ago. He says doctors ran out of treatment options, so he is focusing on quality of life rather than a cure. The Archdiocese of Chicago says Cardinal George will stay in the hospital several days for tests. Archbishop Blaise Supich succeeded Cardinal George after he retired last fall as leader of Chicago's more than 2 million Roman Catholics. Pope Francis has selected a native Californian and history scholar to head the San Diego Diocese. Bishop Robert McElroy has been serving as an auxiliary in San Francisco since 2010. He has degrees from Harvard, Stanford, the Gregorian University in Rome. McElroy will succeed Bishop Cirilo Flores, who passed away from cancer just a year after becoming bishop. With just under 1 million Catholics, San Diego is one of the largest Catholic dioceses in the U.S. Dr. Chad Pecknold is an associate professor of theology at Catholic University, and at least one media outlet is saying that this is a social justice bishop. Is that an accurate label for him?
It's interesting because he is only 5 years ago appointed by Pope Benedict as auxiliary bishop in San Francisco. So what we have is continuity between Benedict and Francis in this appointment. A social justice appointment? I think so, in the sense that he cares about moral norms. He wrote on John Courtney Murray and the concern that natural law be restored for the common good. And so he cares about moral norms like justice.
Well, already today, just after the announcement, he's calling on Congress to pass comprehensive immigration reform. This is a large diocese right on the border with Mexico. Are you surprised by that?
I'm not surprised that he was selected either. He was trained as a political scientist who's worked on moral norms and international relations. He's concerned about economic justice. And he is already stated that he will be a friend to Latinos when the United States immigration policies have let them down. The church will not.
Very briefly, do you think this appointment indicates anything about Francis and his desire for the direction of the church in America?
I think his desire is to place persons above markets and persons above borders. And I think the bishop has already signaled that it's the immigrant families and the call for caring for them concretely that is the concerns of the church, not to be sort of hemmed in by what free market ideology drives us to say, or indeed what national borders drive us to say, but to consider the justice which is owed to the person.
Dr. Chad Pecknold from Catholic University of America, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Hillary Clinton is under scrutiny for what she didn't do as the nation's top diplomat. And don't like Obamacare? There is a Christian alternative you may want to know about. The heart grows hard when it does not love. Lord, give us a heart that knows how to love. That tweet from Pope Francis today on this Tuesday evening. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Well, as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton used her personal email and not a State Department email address. The New York Times reports Clinton's staff did not preserve her messages. This violates National Archives and Records Administration rules. Government emails are public record. A spokesman for Clinton says there's nothing illegal or improper about using a personal email account. He says Clinton emailed other department officials on their department accounts, expecting the emails would be retained. The first high-profile Republican candidate formally enters the 2016 race for the White House. Ben Carson has created an exploratory committee to run for president. Carson rose to national prominence after criticizing Obamacare at the 2013 National Prayer Breakfast. The 63-year-old retired neurosurgeon offered an alternative at last week's CPAC. Carson has developed a following among Tea Party conservatives and other Republicans. The first GOP presidential primary debate is set for August. David Drucker, senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, is with us, along with Karen Cross, political director for the National Right to Life. We'll get back to Dr. Carson in a moment, but I want to ask you, David, what do you think about this email issue with Hillary Clinton? Do you think it affects her run for the White House?
Well, I think it could affect her run for the White House precisely because it plays into all of the negative stereotypes about the Clintons, which is that there's always something underhanded and sort of behind closed doors about how they run politics and how they run their political operation. What I would say, though, is that this is happening so early in the process that this issue is going to be overshadowed by so many news cycles and so many more events. People don't even know who Hillary Clinton's nominee opponent is going to be for the Republicans. So it's hard to tell how this thing's really going to matter come a year from now.
I was surprised the New York Times wrote that story. Were you?
I wouldn't be. They've got a really good team of reporters. They're following her around like they're attached to her. And they're going to try and
looking
dig up
for everything
they can, the good stuff and the bad.
Okay, let's talk about her stance on life issues.
Now, Hillary Clinton is very pro-abortion. She had a 0% record or a 100% pro-abortion record, depending on, but National Right to Life scored her at 0%. She even voted against a ban on partial birth abortions.
What about Ben Carson, who's announcing that he's at least looking into this? What is his stance?
Well, he doesn't have a public record, but he has taken a very pro-life stand publicly. In fact, he spoke at the Maryland Right to Life convention recently.
And Politico puts Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, Carly Fiorina as possible vice presidential candidates. Where do they stand?
All three are pro-life. Marco Rubio has a 100% pro-life voting record. He's a co-sponsor of the No Taxpayer Funding for Abortion Act. We have Carly Fiorina, who ran for Senate. Very good run, too, with a very strong pro-life position. And Jeb Bush, as governor,
very strong,
had a strong pro-life record.
So, David, you were at CPAC. How do you see this race shaping up? Did anybody emerge?
Well, the interesting thing about this race that's so much different than 4 years ago, when the Republicans were preparing to run, is that they have a real deep field of heavyweights, accomplished governors, former governors, senators with national profiles that have really been involved in the national political scene. 4 years ago, you had Mitt Romney and a bunch of political Lilliputians. So I think that the party is serving itself well in a crowded primary like this because they're putting their best foot forward. It doesn't mean it's not going to be messy sometimes. They're going to fight hard, and it's not always going to look pretty. But I think when you can show voters that you have potentially in your field, maybe at least 3 potential presidents, maybe half a dozen potential presidents, it's going to reflect well.
And Karen, did you see anything or hear anything from them about the pro-life issues being part of the conservative agenda versus fiscal conservatism?
Absolutely. They're talking about it, and that's very encouraging. And one thing that I will point out quickly is that the Democrat, the field, is all pro-abortion. The ones that we're hearing about are pro-abortion, while the Republican field at this point that we're seeing is pro-life.
Very interesting and certainly not totally unexpected. Karen Cross with National Right to Life, David Drucker with the Washington Examiner. Thank you both for coming in this afternoon. All right, Obamacare faces a second major legal challenge tomorrow at the Supreme Court. Hundreds of thousands of Christians are getting around Obamacare without facing fines for not being insured. That's because Obamacare exempts members of health care sharing ministries. Our Jason Calvi has more.
What am I going to wear?
In a world of choices, Natalie and Roman Caprano decided against health insurance.
There you go.
In 2013, their insurance company told them they'd lose their coverage, but invited them to find a new plan on the online Obamacare marketplace.
There's a lot of other unaffordable options.
The options were about $300 more a month than their old plan.
I was just angry with the fact that my choices were taken away from me.
Then a friend suggested MediShare, a program where members share medical costs. MediShare executive Tony Meggs says their inspiration comes from the Bible.
As Scripture says, they had all things in common, and they shared their resources with each other and made sure that no one went without need.
Here's how it works. The Capranos sign an agreement that they're Christians and attend church. They also promise not to smoke, use illegal drugs, or have sex outside of marriage. But MediShare is not insurance and has risks.
In actually participating in a healthcare sharing ministry, there's no guarantee that your medical bill will ever be paid. However, since 1993, 100% of the medical bills that we've published to the membership for sharing have been paid.
The Capranos pay about $400 a month. That money goes to a member in need.
It's neat to know where it's going, you know, that somebody in need is getting help, and you're connected in that way. And you can pray for them. You can just get a sense your money's being well spent. It's like a sigh of relief. There are other options.
MediShare has grown enormously since Obamacare became law. They now have 137,000 members. There's also a Catholic version of healthcare sharing. It's called Christ Medicus Foundation Curo. For more information, go to CMFCuro. That's CURO.com. Brian?
Thank you, Jason. It's good to know there are alternatives. And one of South America's most active volcanoes erupts in southern Chile today. The Villarrica volcano spewed heavy smoke into the air as lava spilled down its slopes. This prompted the evacuation of thousands of people from the surrounding area. What incredible pictures. Chile has more than 2,000 volcanoes in this region, but this is considered one of its most dangerous. Up next, how does a mom who loses a young son find happiness? Helping others as she was helped. And Agent 007 meets Pope Francis? A James Bond movie is filming right outside the Vatican. Today, March 3rd, is the feast of St. Catherine Drexel. The Philadelphia heiress gave up her family fortune and founded the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament as well as Xavier University in New Orleans. She ministered to poor African American and Native American populations. Thank you for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. God generously forgives those who learn to do good, but what he doesn't forgive is hypocrisy and fake saints. From the homily of Pope Francis at morning mass at Casa Santa Marta Chapel. Francis says God prefers sanctified sinners to fake saints, people who are more concerned with appearing saintly than doing good. The Pope was reflecting on today's first reading from the prophet Isaiah. Cease to do evil, learn to do good, defending orphans and widows, namely those who no one remembers. The Holy Father described this as an invitation and an imperative that comes directly from God. Rome is also the site of a conference this week called Renewing the Church in a Secular Age. Monsignor Tomas Halik joining us from Rome. He is speaking about communicating the Church's message in a secular society. And Monsignor, what do you see as the most effective way for the Catholic Church to spread the gospel in a society that's so secular?
The best way of the evangelization is the dialogue with the people, not just the monology, the dialogue, to listen and to try to understand the needs of people. The people of today are not godless. Many are seekers, spiritual seekers, and we should accompany the seekers.
You are leading an annual meeting of former students of Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. What is your address to them, your message?
The Pope Benedict wrote some of my books, especially The Patience with God, which was published also in English. And I think it was the reason he invited me to speak about the way how to communicate with the people today. The main idea of my book is that many so-called atheists are confronted with the hiddenness of God. And I would like to say to them that we believers are also time to time confronted with the hiddenness of God. But we should give this feeling into the context of the story of Jesus, of our faith. So to tell them that it is not the last word of God.
And finally, Benedict XVI and Pope Francis engage in dialogue with intellectuals and others who have very different ideas than they do. How do you think the secular society reacts to men of faith like them?
I think the Pope Benedict was admired by many people as an intellectual teacher, as a teacher of theology. Pope Francis is loved by many people as a strong prophet of the gospel. I think he tried to embrace the people and to call the heart of the people, not just the brain of the people.
Thank you, Monsignor Halik, joining us from Rome tonight. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And after the death of her young son, a mother learns to triumph over tragedy. Catherine Zeltner shares her story.
Your life can change at the blink of an eye.
Julie Locke has found a way to turn loss into hope.
It was a very hard time for us, trying to find something to cure our child.
7 years ago, her son Dax was diagnosed with AML, a rare form of leukemia. He was 15 months old. Doctors at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital tried, but couldn't stop the cancer from spreading.
Emotionally, I was exhausted, and when he eventually passed away, I missed him. I missed taking care of him. I was at a loss almost at first because I was so used to taking care of a child.
For more than a year, St. Jude covered every expense, every medical treatment, every meal, the travel. After Dax's death in 2009, Locke set out to give back, to raise $1.6 million for St. Jude, then an entire day's operating cost. This past December, she reached her goal. Earlier this year, St. Jude honored her and Dax.
Oh, this is a big day. So when we receive support, like we get the support from patient families who happen to want to fundraise for us, I mean, it's critical, and it allows us to literally operate St. Jude Children's Research Hospital each and every day.
5 years after Dax's death, Locke is far from finished. As others did for her, she is now doing for them, raising money through the Dax Locke Foundation, helping other families. Families like Adam Crothers dealing with pediatric cancer.
The dollars raised here, there's raising $1 for something, but raising $1 here, it expands a life.
I have never been stronger, happier, and more full in my life.
Building a legacy in Dax's memory, hope out of loss. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, the latest James Bond movie brings some real excitement to the streets of Rome. A chase scene is being filmed in front of St. Peter's Basilica. This shoot closed that long road that leads from the Tiber River to the Vatican early this morning. Rome City Hall says the production company has already paid 500,000 euros for permits, garbage services, as well as traffic cops. Those fees could reach €1 million, depending on extended permits in other parts of the city. The movie will be released in November. Until tomorrow, we invite you to like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter, watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night, and may God bless you.